The title I chose for this morning, Long Strange Trip, is the title of a film, a documentary film about the Grateful Dead, a hugely popular rock band that was active from about 1965 to 1995. In 2017, there was a 4-hour documentary made about this rock band called Long Strange Trip. They were especially noted for including a great variety of music in their unique style: rock, blues, jazz, bluegrass, folk, classical, even jug band. Perhaps some of you have seen this film, Long Strange Trip, that came out in January of last year. Now, here is an interesting coincidence. It turns out that there is another film, a set of films totaling 6 hours, that is also called Long Strange Trip. That set of films came out in 2011, 6 years before the one about the Grateful Dead. And that set of videos is about Unitarian Universalist history. An interesting combination. These videos were created by a Unitarian Universalist amateur historian, he's not a professional scholar, named Ron Cordes, who calls himself a deadhead. In other words, a follower of the Grateful Dead band. No doubt, he knew that the expression Long Strange Trip came from a Grateful Dead song called Truckin'. I'm sure it's not a mistake. When somebody makes a 6-hour video over a period of 5 years, the title is not a mistake. So this is a kind of unexpected coincidence. About 25 or 30 of us have just finished watching the UU History Long Strange Trip. And we've been watching these videos and discussing them on Thursday nights. And some of us have watched them twice now, because we offered this course before. And for myself and many others I've talked to, this has been a good experience, and one that keeps on yielding more insights the more we explore. And so what I'm going to do this morning is share with you some of the insights as we close out our 175th year, some of the insights from this very quick tour through Unitarian Universalist history highlights. This is one of those things that we're just going to go fast. All right. It is important to realize that both Unitarianism and Universalism were present as options in the early church, the early Christian church. Both Unitarianism and Universalism existed. Many Christians thought that all people would eventually be saved. However, that was defined, and this idea came to be known as Universalism, that everyone would be saved and no one is going to hell. We can talk a lot more about that, but I'm running forward. There were also, at the beginning of Christianity, many ideas about who Jesus was. And one of those views was called Arianism. They were the followers of Arius, and that is very close to what eventually came to be called Unitarianism. So that was present at the beginning of Christianity as well. Early Christianity was very diverse. There were all kinds of ideas expressed by different Christians. And this openness was really shut off in 325 at the Council of Nicaea and some of the councils after that. And both Unitarianism, which is the idea that Jesus was not God, just God was God, and Universalism, which was the idea that no one would go to hell, both of those ideas were declared to be heresy. And so they had to go underground. But for over 300 years, they were just different points of view within. They were just like, some people believe this and some people believe that. But they had to go underground as a result of being called heresy. And so, forward to the Reformation, which broke out in the early 1500s, where people started questioning the dogmas of the church. And a young, intelligent Spaniard named Michael Servetus challenged the idea of the Trinity. And I just want to say, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people, the Trinity is not in the Bible. All right, I will argue that with you at coffee hour if you want to. It's not in there. But Servetus, when he challenged the idea of the Trinity, got in a heap of trouble. And to make his very long story short, he was burned at the stake for holding this position. So he was considered the first Unitarian. He was burned at the stake by the Protestant leader John Calvin for having a different belief. Following the death of Servetus, many Protestants were horrified that the Protestants had done such a thing to someone. They were horrified. They thought only the Inquisition did that. And now the Protestants had burnt someone at the stake for having a different belief. And a sizable group of people took a position and said, we should not punish people for what they believe. We should not burn people for what they believe. We should not exile them. We should not take their money. We should not rat on their family. We should not burn down their businesses. We should not exile them from the country. We shouldn't whip them in public. Having a different belief should not be a punishable thing. You should be free to believe as your conscience leads you. This group of people, who also happened to agree with Servetus about the Trinity, came to be known as the Unitarians. And what happened in Unitarianism at that time was that there was a dedication to freedom of belief. Now, other groups did that too, but historically the Unitarians in Europe were the first to do that. And that is a cornerstone of our faith, that we support people's right to believe as their conscience leads them to without fear of repercussion. Universalism also experienced a revival during these years following the Reformation, especially in the United States, where preachers like John Murray and Hosea Ballou declared that a loving God would never sentence his children to an eternal punishment in hell. That it's just inconceivable that a loving God would do that. And that was the message. But of course, the subtext of this theological position is that we too, all of us, should treat everyone as being part of one great human family. Because that's the model that is presented in this theological position. And by the way, with any theological position, we should always ask ourselves, what is the message of that applies to the present? Apart from whether there's even a God or not, I'm not asking you to decide that at the moment. You probably decided anyway. The question I'm saying is, what is the underlying message? So the underlying message of universalism is that everyone should be treated as part of one great loving family. That's the underlying message. And not think of human history as a race headed towards some great conflagration at the end of time where millions of people end up in hell, but rather hold in our minds and hearts the ideal of a united humanity where all are respected and we learn to share together the bounty and the responsibilities of life. And so that popped up strong in the United States. Our church is part of that sweep of universalism. Now, as Unitarianism developed in America, a new movement came out of it that became known as Transcendentalism. And some of the people in Transcendentalism are Ralph Waldo Emerson and Theodore Parker, Margaret Fuller, and the Alcott family, including Bronson Alcott and Louisa May Alcott. You might be watching that series on PBS. I don't know if you are or not. Little Women, that's one of those families. The Transcendentalists declared that spiritual life does not require a particular scripture or a particular kind of priest or particular dogmatic beliefs. The spiritual life is just present. It's just everywhere. And if you open your eyes and ears and minds and hearts, it will come to you. A very good way to start off, according to the Transcendentalists, would be to take a walk in the woods. Take a walk in the woods today, but after the congregational meeting. And then all parts of your soul will be nourished. They said that truth is all around us. The Transcendentalists were not against Christianity. They were not opposed to Christianity. They just thought it wasn't absolutely necessary. It wasn't a wrong thing, it's just that it didn't have any exclusive claim to the truth, because the truth is everywhere. They were nature lovers, and many of them were social activists, especially in opposition to the evil of slavery. And I would like to suggest that many UUs, I think, can find in Transcendentalism a way of looking at the world that still has power and value today. It's an option, I think, for religious liberals in the 21st century. On the Universalist side, I am particularly inspired by Clara Barton and Florence Nightingale, who are pioneers in the field of nursing during the era of the Civil War and the time after that. Clara Barton will eventually travel to Europe and become inspired by the emerging Red Cross movement, and she becomes the founder of the American Red Cross. Florence Nightingale is one of the founders of modern nursing and expresses clearly her guiding principle of care to everyone regardless of which side they may have been on in a war or any other dispute. That does not affect whether we give care to someone or not. We care for everyone. And of course, that's the policy of the Red Cross as well, but that there's no distinction between who the good guys and the bad guys are. It's everyone deserves loving care. And both Clara Barton and Florence Nightingale, who were Universalists, that's a kind of expression of universalism in the world. And again, it's not only them that did that, there were others, but it's a wonderful connection between religious belief and action in the world. Everyone is to be cared for, no exceptions. Unitarian women of this era were also powerful social leaders, including Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the suffrage movement, and Julia Ward Howe, author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and ardent abolitionist and suffragist. And of course, there are many others who deserve our gratitude for their pioneering work. Both Unitarians and Universalists were very active in the 1800s in these social movements to improve the quality of life on this earth. In the early 20th century, Unitarian Sophia Lyon-Fahs, we'll have a game later of finding all their pictures on the cover, but Sophia Lyon-Fahs created a new approach to religious education for children in the early 20th century. And she decided that religious education for Unitarian kids should lay aside the old story of Jesus dying for our sins to save us from hell, to create a new set of curricula that emphasizes love and acceptance, that recognizes Jesus as a model of how to live, but acknowledges other faiths as well. One of her courses that became really widespread was called Church Across the Street, where UU kids go and visit the Methodists and go and visit the Jewish temple and the Hindu temple and the Buddhists. And Church Across the Street is still widely practiced. We do some Church Across the Street programs in our church as well, where we learn about other faiths and they learn about us. Sophia Lyon-Fahs, who worked in the first half of the 20th century, about 100 years ago, her ideas are still considered the core of UU Sunday School. Also, in the first half of the 20th century, we have the humanist movement, which breaks through in both Unitarianism and Universalism, but more strongly in Unitarianism. So in 1933, the Humanist Manifesto is published, arguing that, and this is their argument, that the time for theism is over and that humanity needs to live without this image of God. It was signed by many Unitarian ministers, and it was signed by one Universalist minister, and that minister was the minister of this church. His name is Clinton Lee Scott. He was the only Universalist minister to sign the Humanist Manifesto. The Humanist Manifesto did not mean that everybody had to become humanists. Not at all. We all have freedom at every moment to make our own decisions. So that's not what it meant. But it was a statement of where many people felt the cutting edge of humanity was. And it appealed to and still appeals to many UUs and many people of other faiths, or no faith at all. This philosophy has changed the world. And we can't leave this lightning excursion through UU highlights without talking about something that happened in the 60s called the Black Empowerment Controversy. Those of us in the class just watched a 1-hour film on the Black Empowerment Controversy, so I'm going to quickly tell you about that. Here's the story. During the Civil Rights Movement, many UUs went down to Selma. As a matter of fact, Martin Luther King called the presidents of all the denominations and said, please come down to Selma. And our president was called, and many UUs went, including about 200 ministers, of which our minister, Fred Leshane, was one of them. During that time of the marches for freedom and civil rights, 2 Unitarian Universalists were killed. One of them was a minister named James Reeb, and the other one was a layperson named Viola Liuzzo, were killed during this struggle down in Alabama. So we participated very fully in that movement. And as a result of that, many African Americans joined UU churches during that time. There was an influx of African Americans into our churches. Some churches became majority African American, as a matter of fact, during that time in a couple of the larger cities. And as the African American UUs got more involved in Unitarian Universalism, they asked for more of a role and asked for planning and programs that would meet the needs of other African Americans. And in 1968, at General Assembly, they presented a motion. General Assembly is a meeting of all delegates from all the churches. I'll be there in a couple weeks. Linda will be there in a couple weeks. It's in Kansas City this year. Diane's not sure yet, but she might be there in a couple weeks. You can go too. Talk to me later. They made a motion that $1 million over a 4-year period would be set aside for programming geared towards African American UUs. It would be $250,000 per year for 4 years, and the motion passed by a great majority to do that. We were going to really go for it, to be an interracial church. What the people at GA did not know is that the UUA was broke. The UUA did not have that money. Now, it was not embezzled, and it was not stolen. It was just spent. But that money did not exist. And so, it's a complex story, and there was a lot of anger and upset, but the short version of the story is that we did not keep our promise. That's the short version. We did not keep our promise to fulfill that commitment. And a huge controversy ensued, with African Americans bitterly disappointed and angry that we did not keep our promise. And to make the story short, basically many of the African Americans left Unitarian Universalism. So that's a wound on our history that we need to know about as well. We UUs, the people of such good intentions, had not kept our word. In our time, by the way, the guy who makes this film says that we really learned a lesson out of that, and that after that time, when new movements came up for, say, gay rights, women's rights, other rights issues, we were much more careful to make sure we kept our word. But there was a wound there. And there still is a wound there. So in our time, racial issues are on the table once again, both in the wider culture and in Unitarian Universalism. And we're trying to address that in our church. Beloved Conversations is a program in our church that seeks to address that. And you're going to hear a little bit about that in the congregational meeting. But we can't afford to repeat the tragic errors of the 60s. We need to educate ourselves and become effective contributors to racial justice and to justice for everyone, no matter what category we may fall into in our neighborhoods and in our country. Our own deepest values and the times we live in really demand that of us in a very clear way. So, that is the most ridiculous pass through UU history in 15 minutes anyone could ever do. I'd probably be arrested for going that fast. I'd get a speeding ticket through. What do we do with these stories? What do we do with these stories? One thing I want to suggest to you is that all of these stories are about the areas that we have defined as our mission. Embracing freedom, they're about freedom. They're about loving inclusive. They're about including everyone and bringing everyone into the fold. They're about our spiritual growth, how we view the wider world and how we're connected to the wider world spiritually. You don't even have to use that word if you don't want to, but the issues of how we fit into the universe and then healing the world. All of these stories are those kinds of stories, and they're all sources for us of inspiration as we move on. We need to study them and learn their lessons. I think that Ron Cordes, who made this course called Long Strange Trip, I think he made an intentional comparison of our movement to his favorite band. People don't make choices like that for no reason. I've been thinking for 5 years, why did he call it that? That's a weird thing to call a history course. I believe he made an intentional comparison. It wasn't an accident. Because we are, in a way, a kind of offbeat, eclectic, improvisational, on the margins kind of faith. And we have a powerful set of ideals to live up to. Of just an enormous set of ideals. Freedom, inclusive love, spiritual growth, doing all that we can to heal the world. These are the ideals that guide us on our way. And these stories show us how others have met these challenges. So, as you know, it is our turn. We have to take care of each other and the world as best we can through our highs and lows in our long, eclectic, sometimes strange, but ever hopeful journey toward the best way of life we can possibly imagine. And we need to do it in concert with all others who share these values, all others of any faith, any background, any group, any country, any religion. We need to be in concert with those. In the words of the traditional hymn, Rank by Rank, that say, what they dreamed be ours to do, hope their hopes and seal them true. as heirs of this rich heritage, may we be on our way. So be it.